Good evening, everyone. I'm Maree Archuleta, and tonight I will be presenting my master's project titled An Analysis of Source Data for Mental Maps, Perceptions of Pavement Conditions with an Applied Index in Casa Grande, Arizona. So here's just an outline of what I'm going to be talking about with you tonight. I'm going to start off with my motivation behind this project and move into my study question. I'm going to give you some background on the City of Casa Grande and talk about Lucity, the software that the City of Casa Grande Streets Division currently uses for streets maintenance. I will then go into my data collection methods, and then following that will be my methods used for analyzing the data, followed by results and ending with my conclusion. So my motivation behind this project is that basically the street network is a very important part of the urban landscape, and maintenance of roads are essential for the safety and efficiency of these streets. In addition to that, public tends to be pretty vocal about their opinions on pavement conditions, and depending on whether they think something is good or bad, they're going to let the city government know. So the study question that I aim to answer with this project is that are different stakeholder groups, both public and within the city government, able to be used as adequate predictors of the actual street pavement conditions? So to give you a little bit of background on the study area, this is the City of Casa Grande. It is located about halfway between Phoenix and Tucson in southern Arizona, and it is the largest city in Pinal County. There's about 50,000 people that live in Casa Grande, and it encompasses 110 square miles in its city limits. In terms of the street network, the City of Casa Grande is responsible for maintaining over 400 miles of streets. Lucity is the public works software that the City of Casa Grande uses to maintain its street network. And Lucity generates a pavement condition index value for each street subsegment throughout the city. And pavement condition index values are predicted by distress factors, pavement type, as well as the load factor on each road. So every few years, Lucity will come out and give us a base number, which we will then follow up with our own data. So Lucity can be used, and pavement condition index ranges from 0 to 100, with 0 being the worst and 100 being the best. So Lucity can be used as a standalone product, as you can see in this window right here. For each street subsegment, you have an inventory PCI and a load factor. And then you can also see when it gets rehabbed, so it'll show you when that date occurred and then their technique used. And then in addition to it being a standalone product, it can be used as a tool in ArcMap, and it'll generate, as long as you have that street network that has all of the subsegment IDs that match what's in Lucity, it'll go ahead and generate the current PCI data for the entire network and give it to you in the spatial form. The data that I use for this project, other than the base data that I got from the City of Casa Grande GIS and Streets Division, was collected through a series of surveys. These surveys use the appraisal mental map method, meaning that I gave people existing maps and I asked them to tell me things that they knew about the area. So the first survey that I distributed asked them to rate 20 street segments within the city, and I got 131 responses from that one. And the second survey, I asked them to indicate that the area that they thought had the worst pavement conditions in the entire city, and I got 15 responses from that one. So here's the first survey I distributed. As you can see, there's 20 different segments on this map, and those segments were decided on both geographic distribution as well as they all range in PCI values. I didn't want to give them all bad streets or all good streets. I wanted them to get a range to compare to. And then the survey part that they fill out has them rating each street segment on a level of 1 to 10, 1 being the worst, 10 being the best, and also marking their role in the community that they thought best fit them. So I asked specifically for Streets Division employees. Those are the guys on the streets maintaining it, but they don't necessarily see the data every day. I also asked for police officers, again, people on the streets every day, and residents. I also had an other category, and I got a lot of employee responses, so I included that group in my methods later on. The second survey I distributed was just the basic city limits map, where I asked respondents to circle the area that they thought was worst in the city in terms of street pavement conditions. This could have been as small or as big of an area if they wanted. So if they wanted to circle the entire city, they could have circled the entire city. So the first analysis that I performed was a visual comparison between the different groups and the actual PCI values generated from Lucity. In order to compare the data to the Lucity values, I categorized it by respondent type. So again, streets division employee, resident, et cetera. I averaged all of those responses for each street segment and multiplied it by 100 so it was on the same scale. And then I created maps to compare them all. And then the second method I used using that first survey was an ordinary least squares, which I used the tool found in ArcMap in the spatial statistics toolbox. And it measures model performance and model significance. The final analysis method I used with that first survey is a chi-square test. And it measures the existence of a relationship, and in this case, between PCI and perceived values. And I determined that for this study, my null hypothesis is that there is no relationship between these two things. So as you can see in the chi-square statistic, my observed is going to be what the respondents put down. And my expected is the actual values in this case. And on a p is less than 0.05 level, my theoretical chi-square was 30.4. So in order for me to prove that there was a relationship, my calculated chi-squares need to be higher than that number. The fourth and final analysis that I performed was a cumulative opinion surface, and that used that last survey where people needed to circle everything. So after getting back those survey maps, I digitized all of the features using a digitizing tablet. I then converted these features to rasters, reclassified those rasters so that the areas that people marked were the worst were ones and everything else was a 0. I then added those rasters to create a continuous surface with varying degrees of best and worst areas. So the results for that first analysis where I compared the two groups yielded averages that ranged from 44 to 86, which is a pretty good spread of data. And the most critical group, as we could probably expect, were the residents, and they had the lowest averages for all of those street segments throughout the city. And the most generous was the streets division, but they were also the most accurate. So as you can see, here's the map for the resident scores, and they really paid attention to this downtown area as being the worst. And we'll come back to that at the very end. Downtown was very popular in that other survey. In addition, there's only one green segment, and it's not even in the top bracket, so they just hated everything. And then here we have the streets division, and there's just green all over the place, but they had more mid-range scores, which tended to be the popular pick for the PCI values as well. And then with the police officers and the employees, they were pretty even in terms of what they rated. They didn't give us any too high things or too low of things. And then I just did one combined with everybody's responses to see what would happen, and it pulled it down a little. I think that's a lot to do with the residents' responses because we got a lot of those. And then here's actual pavement condition values. So there are some reds, but there's none in the downtown region. So it's spread a little bit different than what people thought. So the results from my ordinary least squares analysis, I got employees with the highest R-squared value, meaning that employees are able to explain 36% of what was going on in the actual data. And of course, residents had the lowest, only explaining 7%. However, no group had residuals matching the normal curve, meaning the models had bias. So as you can see in these histograms, none of these match that blue line. So they were all over the place. And then the results for that last analysis using the first survey, I got calculated chi-squares all higher than the theoretical, meaning that in every single case, I was able to reject the null hypothesis, proving that there is a relationship between the stakeholder group's perception and the actual PCI values. So the results from my final analysis showed that downtown was rated worse overall, and majority of the respondents circled this area. But when you compare that to the actual areas with low PCI, there they're more spread out through the city than what most people would think. So as you can see in this map, we go from 0 to 7 in terms of surface. So all of these areas were ignored. But this area was heavily concentrated in terms of what people thought was bad. And then when we compare that to the actual PCI values, and this isn't just like those 20 segments as before, this is all of the streets within the city, and I picked the lowest 2 categories of PCI. You have the lowest being this pink color, and while there are some street segments within the city that are that color, they're more spread out than what people seem to believe. So I think that really goes to show the effort of the streets division at the City of Casa Grande. They're not just focusing on doing one neighborhood at a time. They're really prioritizing the streets that need to get taken care of. So in conclusion to this, residents are obviously going to be the most critical group. They, across the board, rated things lower. And for that second survey, it was mostly residents responding. So they were going to give us lower scores. Considering these different analyses, there wasn't a clear answer of whether or not the groups could provide definitive insight to the actual pavement conditions. But there are definitely some aspects where I think they made a difference, especially the streets division guys. They don't look at the data every day, but they see the roads, so they know some more stuff than somebody sitting in their office. Streets with bad pavement conditions are spread out, not condensed like most people would believe. And I think at the end of all of this, we can say that mental maps are powerful in determining the opinion of multiple different groups. And depending on how you want to use it, it can be considered an aiding decision making. However, you must always take that with a grain of salt. I'd like to thank the City of Casa Grande and everybody there who supported me in this project, as well as the MSGIST programs at the University of Arizona.